You think your air conditioner broke down? They faced 55 degrees Celsius with nothing but fabric and wisdom. No electricity, no ice, no escape. Just the endless furnace of the Arabian desert, where the sun doesn't warm, it kills. The moment you step into true desert heat, your body begins a countdown to death. At 50 degrees Celsius, exposed skin burns within minutes. Sweat evaporates before it can cool you. The air itself becomes a weapon, stealing moisture from your lungs with every breath. Your heart races, trying to pump blood through vessels that are expanding desperately to release heat. Your kidneys shut down, conserving what little water remains. Your brain starts to cook inside your skull. This isn't hyperbole. This is physiology. Desert heat doesn't just make you uncomfortable. It systematically dismantles every system keeping you alive. Yet for over 1,000 years, the Bedouins not only survived this hell, they thrived in it. While Roman legions died of heat stroke marching through North Africa, Bedouin warriors crossed the same terrain without breaking stride. While European explorers perished within days of entering the Sahara, Bedouin children played games in sand hot enough to fry eggs. While modern armies require massive logistical support to survive desert warfare, Bedouin raiders appeared from nowhere, struck like lightning, and vanished back into the heat that protected them better than any fortress. They weren't superhuman. They didn't have special genetics or magical resistance to heat. What they had was knowledge, passed down through generations who learned to read the desert's language of death and speak it fluently. They understood something that modern science is only now rediscovering. Extreme heat isn't an enemy to be conquered. It's a force of nature to be redirected. The Bedouins never tried to overpower the sun. They never attempted to create cold in a place designed for heat. Instead, they learned to become invisible to the very forces that killed everyone else. They discovered that the human body, properly managed, could function in conditions that seemed impossible for life itself. Their ancestors made every mistake you could make in the desert. They learned through watching people die, through burying children who couldn't adapt fast enough, through generations of trial and error written in graveyards of bleached bones scattered across the sand. But the survivors took notes. They remembered what worked and what didn't. They built a system of survival so precise, so tested, so refined that it turned the world's most hostile environment into home. The desert heat that killed armies became their shield. The sand that buried civilizations became their highway. The sun that scorched everything in its path became their clock, their compass, their calendar. They didn't fight the desert, they joined it. And in doing so, they achieved something that no technology has ever matched. Perfect adaptation to conditions that should be lethal. When you watch a Bedouin walk calmly through heat that would drop a modern soldier in minutes, you're not seeing toughness. You're seeing engineering. Human engineering, refined over centuries, tested against the ultimate opponent, an environment that kills everything foreign to it. The secret wasn't in their blood or their bones. It was in their choices. Every piece of clothing, every movement, every breath, every sip of water, calculated with the precision of a Swiss watch. Because in the desert, mistakes aren't embarrassing. They're fatal. There's no room for error when error means death. They learned to read heat like sailors read wind. To feel danger in the air before thermometers could measure it. To sense the exact moment when exertion would cross the line from safe to suicidal. They developed instincts that modern science is still trying to understand, abilities that seem almost supernatural until you realize they're just the result of perfect practice in an unforgiving classroom. The Bedouins didn't conquer the desert through force or technology. They conquered it through patience, precision, and a willingness to become something new. Something that belonged in a place where nothing should be able to live. They proved that humans aren't limited by what seems possible, only by what they're willing to learn. In the desert, your skin is your enemy. Every exposed inch becomes a furnace, radiating heat inward and moisture outward. The moment sunlight touches bare flesh, you begin to cook from the outside in. Your body's cooling system, designed for forests and grasslands, becomes a liability in a place where sweat evaporates before it can cool you to so. The Bedouins covered everything. Head to toe, dawn to dusk. Not a single square centimeter of skin exposed to direct sunlight. To outsiders, it looked like madness. Dark, heavy robes and blazing heat. Multiple layers when logic screamed for as little clothing as possible. But the Bedouins understood something that modern science took decades to prove. In extreme heat, more clothing can actually keep you cooler than less. The secret was the thobe, a flowing black robe that seems like suicide until you understand the physics. Modern intuition says black absorbs heat, white reflects it, so desert clothing should be white and minimal. Modern intuition is wrong. Color matters far less than cut, and in extreme heat, the cut that saves your life is loose, layered, and counterintuitive. Black fabric heats up faster on the outside, creating powerful convection currents that turn the entire garment into a natural air conditioning system. Hot air rises up through the loose fabric, pulling cooler air from below and creating a constant breeze against the skin. The wearer exists inside a microclimate, insulated from the killing heat outside by layers of moving air. Scientists at the Weizmann Institute finally proved what Bedouins knew instinctively. Properly worn traditional robes keep skin temperature 2 to 3 degrees Celsius cooler than modern light clothing. That difference isn't comfort. It's the margin between life and death. In desert heat, 3 degrees can mean the difference between functioning and collapse. The genius was in the layers. Not tight layers that trapped heat, but loose layers that created air gaps. Each gap became a thermal barrier, preventing the sun's energy from reaching the body while allowing the body's heat to escape upward through convection. The outer layer absorbed punishment from the sun. The inner layer wickeded moisture away from skin. The air gaps in between created a cooling system that worked without electricity, without moving parts, without anything but physics and fabric. The head wrap, the keffiyeh, wasn't decoration or tradition. It was a life support system more sophisticated than anything modern technology has produced. Wrapped correctly around the head and face, it created a microclimate that filtered incoming air and retained outgoing moisture. Desert air can be so dry it steals water from your lungs with every breath, leaving them parched and damaged. The keffiyeh captured that moisture and fed it back into the breathing cycle, but the wrapping technique was critical. Too loose, and burning air flowed freely to the face. Too tight, and the fabric trapped heat against the skin. The correct wrap required dozens of precisely placed folds, each one serving a specific function. The outer folds blocked direct sunlight. The middle folds created insulating air pockets. The inner folds absorbed moisture and regulated temperature against the face. Even the eyes were protected through calculated positioning of the fabric. Desert sun doesn't just burn skin, it damages vision, creating cataracts and blindness that could kill as surely as heat stroke. The keffiyeh created shadows and reduced glare while maintaining enough visibility to navigate safely. Bedouins could walk all day through blazing sun without sunglasses, their vision protected by nothing but carefully positioned cloth. The extremities required special attention. Hands and feet, farthest from the heart's cooling blood flow, could overheat faster than the core body. So they wore loose gloves and multiple layers of socks, creating the same convection cooling system around fingers and toes. Even the smallest exposure could trigger dangerous heating of the blood before it returned to vital organs. Every piece of clothing served multiple functions. The outer robe protected from sun, wind, and sand while creating cooling airflow. The inner garments wickeded moisture and provided backup insulation. The head wrap filtered air, protected vision, and could be quickly reconfigured as emergency bandages or water filters. Nothing was decorative. Everything was functional. Every thread was a tool for survival. Modern desert military units have spent millions trying to replicate what Bedouins achieved with simple fabric and ancient knowledge. High-tech cooling vests, moisture-wicking synthetic materials, computer-designed ventilation systems. None match the elegance and effectiveness of traditional desert clothing designed through centuries of life-or-death testing. The Bedouins turned clothing into armor. Not armor against weapons, but against an environment designed to kill. And unlike metal armor that weighs down its wearer, this armor made them lighter, cooler, and more capable of surviving in conditions that would cook anyone else alive. In the desert, time becomes biology. The sun doesn't just mark hours, it dictates whether you live or die in each moment. The Bedouins learned to read this solar clock with their bodies, adjusting every aspect of life to the rhythm of heat that could kill with precise timing. At sunrise, the desert wakes up deceptively gentle. Sand that will become untouchable by noon feels cool under bare feet. Air that will turn lethal by afternoon carries the refreshing memory of night. This narrow window, perhaps 2 hours, was the Bedouins' time for everything that required energy. Movement, work, travel, gathering water, feeding animals. They moved with purpose and urgency, knowing that comfort was temporary and heat was inevitable. By 8 a.m., the transformation begins. Sand starts to burn. Air begins to shimmer. The sun, still low on the horizon, gains the power to kill. By 10 a.m., the desert becomes a furnace operating at full power. Sand reaches temperatures hot enough to cause third-degree burns in seconds. Air temperatures soar past human survivability. This is when the modern world would retreat to air conditioning. This is when the Bedouins entered their most critical survival phase. Complete stillness. From 10 a.m. to 4 p.m., Bedouin camps became graveyards of the living. Not rest, shutdown. Total, absolute, calculated inactivity that resembled death more than sleep. They lay motionless under thick blankets, breathing slowly and shallowly, saying nothing, moving nothing. To an outsider, it would look like illness or defeat. To a Bedouin, it was the most important work of the day, staying alive. Every movement generated heat. Every word cost moisture. Every unnecessary thought triggered biological processes that created warmth inside bodies already fighting against lethal external temperatures. During peak heat, survival meant becoming as close to unconscious as possible while maintaining just enough awareness to respond to emergencies. They perfected techniques that modern medicine calls controlled hypothermia, deliberately slowing metabolism, heart rate, and brain activity to reduce internal heat production. Lying perfectly still under heavy coverings, they created dark, insulated microenvironments where their bodies could focus entirely on heat management without the distraction of external stimuli. Breathing became meditation. Slow, controlled, always through the nose to prevent moisture loss and heat buildup in the airways. Some could reduce their breathing rate to just 4 or 5 breaths per minute. Barely enough to sustain consciousness, but sufficient to survive while minimizing internal heat generation. The coverings seemed counterintuitive, thick blankets and deadly heat, but they served critical functions. They blocked any stray sunlight that might penetrate the shelter. They absorbed moisture from sweat before it could evaporate and steal body water. Most importantly, they created a stable microclimate around the body, preventing the wild temperature fluctuations that could trigger dangerous biological responses. After 4 p.m., as the sun began its descent, life slowly resumed. Not all at once. That would shock systems that had spent hours in near hibernation. First, gentle movement. Then quiet conversation. Gradually increasing activity as temperatures dropped and bodies readjusted to full function. By sunset, camps came fully alive for the day's second shift of survival. The serious journeys happened at night. While the sun provided brutal heat during the day, stars provided navigation, and cool air provided relief after dark. Desert temperatures could drop 20 to 30 degrees Celsius between day and night, transforming the same landscape from lethal furnace to manageable environment. Night travel required different skills. Navigation by stars, not landmarks. Movement by touch and sound, not sight. Reading the landscape through feet that could feel changes in sand texture, elevation, and moisture. But it allowed covering distances that would be impossible during daylight hours, moving at speeds that would cause immediate collapse under the sun. Food timing followed the same biological rhythm. Heavy meals during peak heat forced the body to work harder, generating internal warmth when it was already struggling with external heat. So the main meal came only after sunset, when digestion wouldn't compete with heat management for the body's energy and water resources. During the day, they ate strategically, small portions of easily digestible foods that provided energy without requiring significant water for processing. Dates for quick sugar, milk for protein and fat. Nothing that would trigger thirst or require the kidneys to work harder when they were already stressed by heat. Sleep itself was segmented, not 8 continuous hours, but shorter cycles that allowed for constant environmental monitoring. A change in wind direction could signal a sandstorm. A shift in temperature might indicate the need to adjust shelter. Desert survival required awareness even during unconsciousness. Modern heat researchers call this thermal behavioral adaptation, adjusting all activities to environmental temperature cycles. Military units study Bedouin scheduling to understand how humans can function in extreme heat environments. The principles are now used in heat safety protocols for workers, athletes, and soldiers operating in dangerous temperatures. The Bedouins perfected this rhythm centuries before science had terms for it. They learned that fighting the sun's schedule was suicide. Surrendering to it completely was survival. In the desert, time wasn't measured by clocks. It was measured by the body's ability to stay alive. But clothing and timing weren't enough. In the desert, death lived in details that seemed insignificant until they became the difference between breathing and suffocating. The Bedouins learned that survival wasn't about dramatic gestures or heroic endurance. It was about microscopic precision in 1,000 tiny choices that individually meant nothing, but collectively meant everything. Water discipline became an art form more precise than surgery. Every drop had to work perfectly, because wasted water meant death, and the body's instincts for water consumption were designed for environments where water was abundant. In the desert, those same instincts became suicide instructions. Never gulp, always sip. Large amounts of water consumed quickly triggered sweating. The body's automatic response to sudden hydration was to cool itself through evaporation. But in desert heat, sweat evaporated instantly without providing cooling, meaning the body lost the water without gaining the benefit. Small sips, absorbed slowly, allowed hydration without triggering the biological responses that wasted precious moisture. They could make a single cup of water last an entire day by taking drops every hour instead of drinking when thirsty. Thirst wasn't a reliable guide. By the time you felt thirsty in the desert, you were already dangerously dehydrated. Instead, they followed rigid schedules, specific amounts at specific times, regardless of how they felt. The water itself required protection. Stored in goatskin bags that used evaporation for cooling, but evaporation also meant loss. So they wrapped the bags in thick cloth, buried them in sand during the hottest hours, and positioned them to minimize exposure while maximizing cooling effect. Water that stayed too hot could cause shock when consumed. Water that got too cold could cause cramping. Desert water management required constant attention to temperature, not just quantity. Breathing control became a survival skill as critical as finding water. Always through the nose, never the mouth. Mouth breathing loses moisture and heats the airways, sending hot, dry air directly to the lungs where it damages delicate tissues and steals water from the blood. Nose breathing filters, humidifies, and cools incoming air naturally, but it required conscious control when every instinct screamed for more air faster. They learned to slow their breathing rate until it barely sustained consciousness. Each exhale represented lost moisture. Each inhale brought in air that could damage overheated airways. Some could reduce their breathing to just 4 breaths per minute during the hottest hours, entering a meditative state that resembled suspended animation more than normal rest. Strategic cooling with precious water required precision that would impress battlefield medics. When water was too scarce to waste on comfort, they used drops only on pulse points, wrists, neck, temples, ankles. Blood vessels close to the skin at these locations carried cooling throughout the body more efficiently than water applied randomly. 3 drops in the right places worked better than a full cup poured over the head. They understood anatomy better than most doctors. The carotid arteries in the neck, the radial arteries in the wrists, the temporal arteries at the temples. Cooling these major blood pathways could drop core body temperature within minutes. A wet cloth pressed to the wrist for 30 seconds could provide relief lasting hours. But the ultimate secret wasn't physical, it was psychological. Heat control started in the mind, because panic creates heat faster than the desert sun. Anxiety increases metabolism, triggering internal heat production when the body was already struggling with external temperatures. Fear accelerates heart rate, forcing the cardiovascular system to work harder when it needed to conserve energy. Stress triggers sweating, wasting water for no cooling benefit. The Bedouins trained their minds like modern athletes train their bodies, to stay calm when every environmental signal screamed danger. They practiced meditation techniques that could slow heart rate, reduce metabolism, and maintain clear thinking even when their bodies were operating at the edge of survival. Mental discipline meant accepting discomfort without fighting it. Pain was information, not emergency. Thirst was a signal to monitor, not a crisis to solve immediately. Heat was a constant to work with, not an enemy to defeat. They learned to separate physical sensations from emotional responses, treating their bodies like machines that needed careful management rather than sources of suffering that demanded immediate relief. They developed what modern psychologists call stress inoculation, exposing themselves gradually to increasing levels of heat stress until their minds could function normally in conditions that would cause panic in others. Young Bedouins learned to stay calm during controlled exposure to dangerous heat, building mental resistance alongside physical adaptation. Movement itself became a calculated science. Every gesture had to justify the heat it created. Walking meant short steps to minimize energy expenditure. Sitting meant positioning to maximize shade and airflow. Even turning the head required consideration. Unnecessary movement generated heat while providing no survival benefit. The Bedouins discovered that humans could function in conditions that seemed impossible for life, but only through absolute precision in every choice. They didn't conquer the desert through strength or endurance. They conquered it through becoming something new. Beings capable of perfect efficiency in an environment designed to waste everything. They proved that survival wasn't about being tough enough to handle pain. It was about being smart enough to avoid creating it. In a world growing hotter every year, those ancient lessons might be the only thing standing between modern civilization and heat that could kill us all.